Good morning. If you'll take your Bibles and open to Genesis chapter 39. Genesis chapter 39, we'll be reading a passage from here in just a moment. Well, I am sure that all of you are aware of what today is. No? All right. Well, I asked Isaac Bemis about it, and he didn't know either. I got all my tears out then, so I won't worry about crying now. Today starts my third year with you as the role of preacher of this congregation. It was the first Sunday in August that we began in 23, and it's hard to believe it's already been 2 years. I'm not out of sermons yet, so we'll have a little bit more time together, I hope, and we'll see how things go. We have very much enjoyed the past 2 years being with you and look forward to more work together. And boy, especially the weather the past couple of days. Compared to what it was the weekend before, to what it's been this weekend. I've been sending all my friends and family in Florida screenshots of WeatherBug showing how cool it was when I woke up at 55 degrees this morning. I'll take that on August 3rd anytime. But I'm thankful for your partnership in the gospel. I'm thankful for your generosity. I'm thankful for your regular encouragement. Y'all are so good to us, and we really appreciate that. And I hope and pray that I can be an encouragement to you as well. In keeping with our theme this year, sound in faith and sound in doctrine, I'm going to start kind of a mini-series in the middle of that. And we want to think about how many different professions have their own lingo. If you're watching football, you're going to hear some terminology and some phrases that you don't hear on a regular basis. You might hear about a real fast guy stretching the field, and your thought would be, well, what does he mean by that? You might hear about the West Coast offense or a quarterback sack. What are these things? In business, you have a bull or a bear market. You might talk about your accounting firm and all the tax sheets that you need to fill out and that kind of a thing. With medicine, if you're a nurse or a doctor, have you ever had them talk to you like straight with all the medical lingo? You won't know what they're saying. Pulmonary embolisms and all of this stuff, and they start throwing out all these acronyms and that kind of a thing, and you're like, hold on, I'm from Alabama, you need to describe what you're talking about here. And then you get to law, and it gets even worse because everything is Latin, habeas corpus, and all of this kind of stuff. You talk about liens and dockets and affidavits and all of these things. Well, it's really no different when we come to the religious lingo. We have a lot of words that we use in a religious setting that we don't use elsewhere. And sometimes it's even worse because they have in our minds, they have such a high level of religious or spiritual meaning that we kind of make them more difficult than they ought to be. For instance, the word church in Greek is just the word assembly. There's nothing inherently religious about it. You can have an assembly at the football game or a city assembly where they vote on issues, and then you have an assembly where they gather together for a religious purpose. And we could talk about all of these. We won't. Don't worry. It's not going to be a 10-week mini-series or anything like that. But some of these words we often just use in a religious setting, and maybe we give a little bit more or make them a little bit more difficult than they need to be. For instance, righteousness. We think, that's a big word. That's a big, hefty religious word. It just means doing what's right. That wasn't that hard, was it? and we can pick up on a lot of these things. Today, I want to talk about the word stewardship. I want to talk about the idea of being a manager. And we won't cover all these words. We'll just look at a few of them here and there as they relate to our theme for the year of being sound in faith and sound in doctrine. Well, I like to start off by defining stuff. Let's define the word stewardship. Let's look at dictionary.com. A person who manages another's property or financial affairs. One who administers anything as the agent of another. It continues, a person who has charge of the household of another, buying or obtaining food, directing the servants, etc. And we might use the term manager. So when we think about this, these two definitions here, the bottom one is going to be more of what we see in the New Testament, the concept of what we see in the New Testament, and the top one might be a little bit more of what we think of when we think of a manager. And really what we're talking about is the idea of a restaurant. You might own a restaurant, but oftentimes you'll have a restaurant manager. And they do a lot of the ins and outs, they do a lot of the day-to-day things, but they don't own it. And they are responsible for making sure it runs and runs well, but they don't own it. What's maybe more helpful is to see this in Scripture. In Genesis 39, let's look at verse 4. Genesis 39 at verse 4. So Joseph found favor in his sight, that is Potiphar, and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house, and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Joseph was a steward in this man's house. Turn over to the New Testament. Turn over to Luke chapter 16. The older translations even use the phrase steward here. The parable of the unjust steward, I think, is how this is termed in most translations, at least some of the older ones. The ESV says the parable of the dishonest manager. In Luke chapter 16 at verse 1, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, "What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager." He wants the books. He wants him to turn in the books that he keeps. And the manager said to himself, "What shall I do since my master is taking the management from me?" And you'll remember he has the debtors sit down and say, "Hey, take your receipt, and instead of 50 cups of oil, you owe me 30. And instead of 20 barrels a week, you owe me 10. And he uses his managerial authority to decrease what they owe. Hopefully they'll pay him back the favor before long. Paul uses this concept in 1 Corinthians 4. In 1 Corinthians 4 at verse 1. First Corinthians 4, verse 1, "This is how one should regard us, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mystery of God. Moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful." Paul is basically saying, I'm not the king. I'm not the one who brought all of this into being. I'm not the one who carried out or conceived the plan. I am just a servant of the king. I am just a messenger. Paul will use that idea regularly throughout his letters. And then, of course, we all know the parable of the talents in Matthew chapter 25. We'll reference this a number of times in this lesson. The parable of the talents, the master comes in and he doles out some money to these individuals, and he expects them to go and make a profit with it. But they're going to answer to him. They're going to have to return this to him. And so that's the idea of stewardship. But I want to bring it into the realm of spirituality. for a minute. And I want to give you two simple premises. This is what stewardship is, as we need to think about it. God owns it. Guys, it's all his. You don't have claim to anything. I don't want to get political. If you take it this way, that's fine. But even the things we can lay claim to, at the end of the day, somebody else can come and take from us. You don't pay the taxes, you don't pay enough of the taxes, you don't submit the right paperwork, all of these kind of things. But we understand that God owns it. He's the master in the parable of the talents. It's all his. Deuteronomy 10 at verse 14, behold, to the Lord your God belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, the earth, with all that is in it. In Nehemiah 9 at verse 6, you are the Lord, you alone. You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and all that is in it, the sea and all that is in them, and you preserve all of them. Isaiah 66 at verse 1, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. All these things my hand has made. And so all these things came to be, declares the Lord. In those first two passages, people were speaking of God. Now God speaks for himself here through Isaiah. And then Psalm 50 at verse 10, for every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and its fullness are mine. And Job understood this same exact thing. You'll remember that horrible day in Job's life where servant after servant came to him to tell him how all of his possessions had been taken away, and finally even his children. And Job says in Job 1 at verse 21, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Do we understand this point? That God owns it. Kind of goes along with some of the comments in the prayer that Dennis made before the contribution this morning. Maybe if we would understand this more, we would change the way we view things a little bit. So that's the first premise. God owns it. We could spend a lot longer on that. I won't this morning, but maybe it's something you could think about and spend some time with. The second premise is that I am here to manage it. All this is God's. All that is in my keeping belongs to God. He has given it to me to manage. In fact, the very breath of your body comes from God. In Genesis 2 at verse 7, then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living creature. And this is what God has intended from the very beginning. In Genesis 1 at verse 28, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. You see, God gave this into our keeping. This wasn't, kind of as I mentioned in Bible class this morning about being a king and throwing around your weight and authority and that kind of a thing. God doesn't want us just to sit at the top of the food chain and say, ha ha, all this is mine, deal with it. That's not what he's saying, but that it is here for our use and we should be good stewards, we should be good managers of it. Sometimes I feel a bit spiteful. Do you ever get spiteful? You want to just kind of thumb your nose at somebody and people trying to tell you what to do and that kind of a thing. So sometimes my thought is, well, let's, not worry. All of this global warming, tree hugging, save the earth, all of that. Sometimes I bristle up against that. I won't get on my soapbox. I won't do it. I won't get into my conspiracy theories, okay? I have a couple. I mean, they're not as bad as the heirs' conspiracy theories, but I got a couple. And I remember, do y'all remember Glenn Beck? He's not quite as popular anymore. He had a talk show for a long time, and one day I remember him say it was kind of an global warming thing that he had going on. And he was like, run your electronics all day, run the dishwasher empty, just out of spite. And I was laughing about that whole thing. And my lovely wise wife, I remember her saying, well, that's just silly. And she said, God gave it to us for our keeping. And we need to be good stewards. This doesn't mean we can't drive our car to the grocery store or that kind of a thing, but it is for our keeping, and we have to answer for what we do to earth. And again, I'm not saying you got to run out and buy a Prius. That's not what I'm saying, but this earth has been given to us, and we will have to answer for its management. I like this quote. It's from a guy named Tim Challis, I think is how you say, maybe Challis, I don't know, but I've always said Tim Challis. He said, the difference between an owner and a steward is accountability. You see, God doesn't answer to anyone, but I will. The owner of a restaurant, he may make some decisions that aren't good, but it's his restaurant. And the manager has to answer to him. And if the manager has done some things or hired some people or fired some people that was a bad call, then the manager has to answer for that. So if we understand that God owns it all, and if I understand that I manage what has been given to me, then we must recognize that we will be held accountable to the owner for what we did with what he's given us and with his creation. Now, I know you'd like it if I'd say, let's stand and sing, and we'd be done. But you know that there's one more part of this outline. I was told last week, I was rebuked for my outline a couple weeks ago. They said I got through my outline too quickly, and I still had too much sermon left at the end of the outline. And they said, maybe I could put a conclusion section down there when I'm going to have a long conclusion. Well, you have another section here on your outline, and I just want to talk for just a few moments about where we are called to be good stewards. And once we're done, I know, if we were in Bible class, we could go around and fill this page up. But I'm just going to give us a few things to think about, some places in our lives that maybe make up a big portion of our lives. And the first thing that we have to talk about, ladies and gentlemen, is money. To see our money and our possessions, which we manage as belonging to God, should change our view on how we handle money. It is not just mine, and I am accountable for it. Are we going to hoard it up for special or for selfish purposes, which would be to act against the very owner of these monies and possessions? He doesn't do that. So why should we be like the rich fool in Luke 12 who says, look at all this I've been given. I don't even have anywhere to put it. So I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Some have argued that part of the reason he might want to put all of these crops away is this would create a deficit in the market. And then he could wait until all the supply had sold out, then he could put in his goods to sell at a higher price. That's a lot of work on a parable when that wasn't exactly what Jesus was saying. It's an interesting thought nonetheless. This behavior should lead to generosity. Dennis mentioned 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. Another passage that's often mentioned before the contribution is 2 Corinthians chapter 8. As Paul is praising and giving a big attaboy to the Macedonians who weren't that wealthy, but they were given like it. And it says that they first gave themselves to the Lord. And we see how that affected their giving. We need to understand that what we have belongs to God. How dare we waste what he has given us charge over? What about our time? Have you ever turned the money you're going to spend for something and the time that you're going to have to work to earn it. I'm going to tell on my two older kids right now. They have a very good work ethic. I'm very proud of them for that. And they both had jobs before they could drive. Don't offer me gas money. But anyway, they have very good work ethic, and they're building up some savings, and which is good because life it requires money, right? These kids got more money to burn than I do. And then we go somewhere, we meet up for ice cream somewhere. They get there before me. And do you know what these little boogers do? They wait on me to get there. Jeff Horn is nodding his head because he's got 3 adult kids, and they still do the same thing. But if you take, and I've thought about this some, if you take, all right, we'll just make it easy. I make $10 an hour, and those shoes cost $50, which is a cheap pair of shoes nowadays, right? I've got to work 5 hours. That's a whole shift at Chick-fil-A for Lillian. I've got to work a whole shift to get these shoes. Our time, we understand, is money. This is a difficult subject to balance, isn't it? The book of Proverbs constantly praises hard work. It condemns and mocks laziness. And yet, the book of Ecclesiastes says that he put all his time and effort into work, and it was vanity. It didn't amount to anything. But then we read over in the New Testament, Jesus says, or Paul says, if a man not work, neither let him eat. In 2 Thessalonians 3 verse 10. And yet Jesus had no problem telling the disciples, y'all stay here, I'm going to go over here by myself for a little while. And even when they came back from the limited commission, he wanted them to come away and to rest for a little while. Well, now what is it? Are we supposed to work our fingers to the bone, or are we supposed to rest? And so there is some balance here. Maybe this is why the poem of Ecclesiastes 3 is where it is. There is a time for everything. There is a time to sow and a time to reap. There is a time for work and a time for rest and these kind of things. But what we do need to remember is that we have a limited amount of time. And we are responsible for the time that we are given, and this calls for an evaluation of priorities. What am I spending my time doing? Ephesians and Colossians both use the phrase redeeming the time, making the best use of the time. That means we're going to have to choose some things over others, and when we stand before God, we will have to give an accounting for the amount of time. And when we say, I didn't have enough time, I'm afraid of the graph that's going to come up and show where I used my time and how much time I spent on that phone playing Doodle Jump or Angry Birds instead of doing something that matters and has an impact in my life and on the lives of others. It's God's time. He's given it to us, and we will be accountable for how we use that time. What about our children? I saw something recently, it said the past few years people have been saying, well, we need to leave a better world for our children. That has really swung the other way, has it not? Maybe we need to leave better children for our world. And none of you kids, of course. You kids are all good. We don't need to have an in-depth discussion of how children are a gift from God. We don't need to review all the Old Testament stories where someone was brokenhearted because they were barren. We know that children are a gift from the Lord. The question is, what are we doing with our children? What are we teaching our children? I saw this recently and I thought it was good. It said that we have outsourced parenting. And I think that's pretty good. Other people are raising our children. Other people are teaching our children. Other people are disciplining our children, maybe. Other people are teaching our kids the Bible. We feel like that's not my responsibility. That's on the Bible class teachers only. And sometimes we even use screens to do all this. And the results so far aren't great. Outsourcing parenting doesn't seem to work. The simple fact is that God has called me to raise my children in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. I cannot turn that responsibility over to anyone else. You know those cars that you pull back and that winds them up and you let them go? And a lot of times, how you let them go and the way in which you direct them has a big impact. If you just pull it back and let it go and don't guide it at all, it'll go anywhere. But a lot of times, if you're very careful and take some aim, and the Bible teaches that raising children is much the same way. We can't be responsible for everything they do when they're an adult, but if you train a child in the way they should go, when they are old, they will not depart from it. And I heard this, and it cut me. It said that a lot of times we're too often focused on the exception to that rule instead of on the training part. We're so focused on when that might not work out that way instead of being focused on the am I actually training them. Children are a gift from God, and we will stand accountable for what we teach them and how we raise them, and whether or not we have disciplined them. One more. We could keep going. We won't. But our abilities. God has given us abilities. How are we using them? We each have differing abilities, varying abilities. What are we doing with them? What is our focus with these abilities? Are we trying to find ways in which we can glorify God with these things, to encourage others with these abilities? That doesn't mean that it always has to be something directly spiritually related. We can do good for others. We can help others and it not be in the context of church or worship or along those lines. And I realize that the parable of the talents in Matthew 25 is about money, but it is easy for us to apply it to our physical talents and our abilities. That God has given us something. Are we using it? You have a high level of music ability. As someone down here close to the front, I don't know, might be a band director. Does he participate in the song worship? And which obviously he does. I wouldn't be calling him out like that and be like, look at Steve here. Doesn't even lead singing. My word. But we have these abilities. Are we using them to help others? And even the simplest ways. I can say something nice. So I can pat somebody on the back on the way out and give them some kind of encouragement. Whatever the case may be. What will we do with what God has given us? Let me talk to the young people for just a moment. Because I know you see your parents doing these things. And I know you're in your kind of own world, you and your friends, and that's good. But sometimes it gets said that children or young people are the future of the church, and that's a little wrong. Because if you're a Christian, you're a part of the church now. And you can start doing some of these things now. And I noticed that some of the elders and deacons have given some little assignments here. Hey, would you be able to do this? Could you do that? Some of our younger ladies are putting the Lord's Supper together, just these little things that sometimes get done behind the scenes, little things that can be done and need to be done. Are we ready and willing to do them? Young people, if someone came forward, have you ever noticed that after we address the issue and we often say a prayer, that a lot of people come down and encourage them, hug them, and be with them? Something that you can do. You might feel, I'm just a young person, yet you have that ability. And you know what it's like to be encouraged. So let's be an encouraging bunch, or whatever your ability might be. As Christians, we are called to be good stewards of what God has put into our control. Here's the question. Are you going to use it for His benefit, or are you going to bury it in the sand? And there is judgment for the latter one. Let me say this one real quick. This is why we can't make some hard distinction between our spiritual life and our secular life. Because if we are followers of Jesus Christ, if we are children of God, then the things we do every day in our parenting, in our relationship with our spouse, in our work, in our hobbies, in our abilities, and how we even use our money, God has an impact on that. Because if we are going to be followers of Christ, it is about our whole lives. Let's remember, He owns it. We manage it. We will be held accountable. And if you're not a Christian this morning, if you haven't obeyed the gospel, I want you to think about the soul that you are in possession of and how you are managing that soul. The life that you've been given, knowing that one day you will stand before God and there will be a reckoning. I, for one, want to hear those beautiful words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." If you want to hear those words, then you need to submit to Jesus Christ in faith and obedience. Give Him your life, be buried with Him in the waters of baptism, have your sins washed away, and rise to walk a life of stewardship. And you can do that this morning while we stand and while we sing. Have you been to